Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Your Best Game Ever series. I'm Darcy Ross, and this is Monte Cook. We're from Monte Cook Games, and we're so excited to be talking to you today about how to be the player that everyone loves. So this is a topic that's covered in more depth in the book, Your Best Game Ever. This is a tool book, not a rule book, on all kinds of great actionable advice and techniques to make every game that you play closer and closer and reaching your best game ever. So it's for players, it's for GMs, it's for designers, it's for anyone who plays RPGs, no matter what your system is or what background you're coming from. We're really excited about it, and we're going to do a short video on a deeper topic about being a great player today. So you can find out more about all of that at yourbestgameever.com. But for today, let's talk players, Monty.
Sure. So we're gonna, we'll be doing some more videos, and some of them will be about, how to have a cool backstory and stuff like that. But today I want to talk about if you've got a friend in your gaming circle, right? And she is just always the person who is at the top of everyone's list of oh, I'm going to start a new campaign. I definitely want to invite Sarah. Or
yeah.
How do you get to be Sarah, right? How do you get to be that person? These are our tips for how to be that player. And, maybe you can't do all of them, but the more of them that you can, the more you're going to endear yourself to your friends, to your GM, to just sort of everyone that you game with.
Absolutely. RPGs are so social.
Yes.
This is a great skill set to be building. And I think we can always I can always be better, right? I love that aspect. There's always something I could be doing to sort of up my game in being a great player and being the kind of player that everybody wants to game with.
Right. I mean, it would be easy enough for us to just say, don't be a jerk and be done with it, right? But I'd rather focus on the more positive things that you can do rather than the things that maybe you shouldn't do so much.
Kind of proactive.
Yeah. And so the first thing that I think of is I'm going to call it facilitating the fun. And, if you think about it, I mean, this is a game, we're doing it for fun, we're having fun. So think about the things that are the most fun aspects of the game and focus on them, right? So when you roll that 20, right, you roll that critical success and you're really excited, everyone feels that way. Everyone around the table feels that way. And so, when somebody rolls a 20, be excited, right? Be excited for them, right? If somebody if somebody is the one who kills the main bad guy, rejoice, right? Be happy for them. Even if you wanted to be the one who, dealt the final blow or, took out the last 3 hit points or whatever, because you'll get to do that next time, right? But the more positive that you are about them, about what that is, the better off you're going to be, right? And the better off that everyone's going to feel good about themselves, and it's just a more positive experience, right? And think about other things too. If someone comes up with a crazy plan that just sounds like it'll be fun, but you don't go with it, right?
Yeah.
Because it's going to be fun, right? If it's outlandish and whatever, who cares, right? That's part of the fun. Don't be the naysayer. Don't be the one who never wants to do anything or is always too cautious or, always comes up with the flaw in everyone's plan. Be the positive person, right?
Yeah, make those big choices and embrace when other people are making those big fun choices. Gosh, it's just when I first started playing RPGs, it took me a while. I was trepidatious as a player. It took me a while to remember that I'm not playing to win. If good story is happening, we're winning, right? So if I have some really spectacular failure, as long as I look around the table and everybody's really enjoying it, that's a success in my book. But it took me a while to get there. But I think you're so right. Keeping your eyes open. Where is the fun? Who's having it? How can I amplify it? How can I be a facilitator for it?
And the more you do that, the more it will be fun. It will become fun for you when other people succeed or when other people come up with a plan. You just have to kind of get into your mindset of this game isn't just about me and the successes that my character has, right? It's about all of our successes.
Yeah. Speaking of characters, right? There's this duality, or in some games like Predation, triality. Uh, you're a player, you're a friend at this table, right? But you're also playing a character. Are there things that are there choices you can make as a player about your in-game character that can contribute to being a great player and a great table experience?
I think yes, and I think that a lot of, I mean, I think we all know these things, but I don't know that we all practice them, right? And that
Mm,
is just some things simply like, sharing your resources, right? Being the
mm,
person who's there on the spot to help somebody who's in need, protect somebody when they're in danger, being generous with your money, your supplies, or whatever it is. Um, that's going to endear you to the other players, right? And that's what we're talking about. And you
hmm.
might say, oh, but my character is not like that, right? My character is a selfish jerk.
Right.
Well, okay, that's a valid choice, but realize when you make that choice, you're going to make it that much more difficult for you to be everyone's favorite player, right? It's not impossible. I have
Right.
seen people play jerks, and but everyone loved them. But it's a lot harder.
Yeah. I had a fascinating, I had in a Numenera campaign, there was a player who was playing a character that was like really weird and out there, just totally, alien and, wouldn't connect with anyone, was a little combative with the other characters. Um, and when we had kind of a bigger group size, there were sort of two weirdos who got to be kind of weird together. And so the dynamic kind of worked. And then one player had to leave, and what I really loved about what this player did was that he sort of saw that the dynamic had changed, and now he was just confrontational with everyone. And it was kind of starting to take down the fun a little bit. And so he kind of reassessed, how is my character fitting in right now with this party? And he was like, oh, it's not quite right. And so he sort of had this character have a moment, and built some bonds with another character, and adjusted the dynamic. And man, I will like sing that player's praises forever for that, because he was able to see, I understand how the dynamic isn't quite right, and I'm going to take it upon myself to make it better. It was so cool.
That is so smart, right?
Yeah.
Because you can create the character who is problematic in some way, right? Either
Yeah.
they are unable to relate to other people, they're a jerk, whatever. But if you then have that character change and grow, adapt to the situation,
Yeah.
not only have you sort of gotten to the point where you can be the character or the player that everybody loves, but you have then just given yourself a character arc that would be great to see in a book or a TV show or whatever, right? Because you've seen your character grow and change, which is why we like stories. That's the fundamental aspect of stories, is watching a character grow and change, right?
Oh, that's such a good point. Um, so, just as I'm a relatively recent GM, and I can just look back on all my experiences as a player, my early days as a player, my later days, how I've become a player after I've been a GM. So, what is your advice for, we've talked about having your character be helpful to the party. What's your advice for the player to player interactions, like, sort of on my level? How can I be useful, sort of metagamed?
Right, yeah. So totally on the metagame level, right, where it's just
Yeah.
player to player or player to GM. Um, Here, I can tell you what I find. Like, I'm usually the GM,
Hmm.
and some of the stuff that I love to see
Hmm.
is, if I've got players around my table, maybe they all have different experience levels, and I've
Hmm.
got a newer player and they're having some trouble remembering a rule or understanding how a certain aspect of the game works. If another player will sort of kind of quietly turn and help them out while I'm dealing maybe with a scene that involves someone else, or whatever, if I'm doing something, they've just made it so that the game didn't just come to a halt, right? Because if the
Right.
GM has to stop and answer a question, the game basically comes to a halt. And they've taken that responsibility off of my shoulders as the game master, and sort of taken that on themselves. And so that they've just, made my life easier, kept the game moving at a good pace. It's
Right.
so great. And whether that's a rules question or a setting question or anything like that, I think that's super, super valuable. We were talking in an earlier video about, like, if you're the person who knows the rules really well, don't be a rules lawyer, but be a rules resource. Right? Just be the person who, like, oh, the range of that spell is 60 feet or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. And, don't do it in a sort of a, well, actually kind of way, but being a resource in that way makes you a very good person to have around, have at the table, I think. Let's see. So what other things can players do to help other players, Darcy?
I was thinking about how I love to host a game. I love having people over at my place. I love, I kind of, part of what I like about the social aspect of gaming is that I get to hang out with really lovely people and tell a cool story together. And I like the aspect of hosting. And so something that I'm definitely known for and have perhaps done over much is about checking in on the well-being of the players around me and sort of, seeing, is someone about to fall into their character sheet because they came over before eating dinner and I can see that their just glucose levels are shot. Can I quietly just happen to pull out a snack from a drawer and, put it on the table, right? It's not interrupting the game, but just, looking out for, does everyone have water? Does someone need caffeine? And I've definitely noticed that sometimes I can get like too into that, right? I just like, I'm a fusser. So my group has been kind enough to help me kind of calibrate that correctly, where I'll say, I'll say quickly, hey, I'm going to grab a snack. Does anyone want anything? And people can say yes or no. And I respect their decisions. I don't give them 18 options. Sort of finding the unobtrusive way to sort of look in on everybody's well-being is kind of something that I've grown into, I think.
I think that's great advice. In fact, it's a really important topic. There's a whole chapter in Your Best Game Ever on hosting games, right? Because I think that that's a really valuable topic that we don't really talk about that often, right?
Right.
But I actually think that like the things that you were just saying, like, hey, I'm going to go get a snack. Does anybody else want anything? You can do that even if you're not the host, right? I mean, right. I feel like most game groups kind of work this way, right? People bring over chips and snacks and drinks or whatever. They kind of sort of pile them all on the kitchen counter. Then they go into wherever the game is.
Yeah.
And then, people sort of one by one go into the kitchen and grab a thing. And, how easy is it to just say, hey, does anybody else want a soda or whatever it is?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of just basic level of consideration. I think there's an interesting dynamic. I think that people who even normally would do that kind of thing might not in a game session because they're afraid that they're interrupting.
Yeah.
But, no one's gonna be sad if you bring over a plate of cookies, right?
Exactly. And the GM, I think, I definitely try to look in on the GM because I know when I'm game mastering, I'm so focused on all the stuff that I'm keeping up in my head. Sometimes I'm not even really in tune with, like, I'm getting way dehydrated, or I could use a snack, or I could use some caffeine. I'm just not even thinking about my own well-being. And so I know that can happen a lot in the GM seat. And so I try to, watch for water levels going down at the GM and just, appearing out of the mists with a fresh water for your GM is not going to lose you any points.
Gosh, right? Sure. Such a godsend.
Yeah.
And, I remember having a conversation once with somebody, and it was a person who was always coming into the game, and they had a big bag because we always have big bags, yeah, books and whatever. And so the topic of what's in your bag came up, right? And he said that, okay, so I have my set of regular dice, right, that I use. Mm-hmm. And I have this sort of backup set of dice if my dice are rolling poorly.
Yeah.
And then he would pull out like this bag of dice. And he said, and these are sort of the miscellaneous dice that I bring in case anybody needs them. And it's that kind of forethought about
Yeah.
the other people at the table. I mean, whether you're talking about dice or pencils or snacks or whatever, right? That's just great, right? That's going to make people love you.
And, anytime, so especially when I was just first getting my comfort level up as a player and as a GM, I would sort of over prep stuff, right? I'd focus on all these accessories. So I would have anything I could possibly need, or anyone else would. And so I think even before I had mastery of rules or was really good at role playing or really got what RPGs were, I knew how to be a helpful person at a table, right? And so I always found I always loved when I could feel like I was helping. And so I think, I've tried to remember that when someone's trying to bring me a water because I'm the GM and I'm like, no, I don't need any fussing, go. I've been like, they want to help. And like, I probably do need water, maybe accept that assistance. So I've kind of learned to be better. I think I like to be the host, sort of pulling all the puppet strings, and I've got everything perfectly under control. And I've learned to like let people help me. Like those helpful people, embrace them. Part of me being a good player is learning the strengths of the players around me, right? And letting them act on those. I think that's a big lesson I'm starting to learn.
Let people help you. I guess that's a good little addendum to this. Yeah.
So once everyone's fed and watered and appropriately, has characters that are working well at the table, sort of in a given session, what are some advice that you have for how they can role play well, or how they can become a player back into the fiction, not at the meta level?
So I think I'm going to speak again from kind of a GM centric point of view, from the point of view of like, if I'm thinking about who am I going to invite to my next campaign,
right?
I'll tell you right now that almost always the very first person that I put on my list of people to invite is my friend Bruce. And the reason for that is that Bruce is a very curious and interested player all the time, right? If I'm creating a place, Bruce is interested in what is going on in that place, right? If we're playing D&D and there's a weird monolith in the room and everyone else is kind of afraid to touch it, Bruce wants to know what's going on, right? Yeah. He wants to investigate it. And that, when we talked about this a little bit in a previous video, like there is no greater compliment that you can give to a game master than to just simply be really interested in the things that they've created, right? Because game masters, they work really hard at coming up with this stuff, and so just having someone be interested in the ideas, the stories, the characters, the things that they've created, it's such a compliment. It's why a lot of us do it, right? Is to create and present cool creations to our friends, and just a little bit of feedback is great. It's ego boosting, but it also enables a better dynamic at the table, right? If the players are really interested in whatever is going on, and I don't just mean like they're paying attention. I mean like take that extra step and say, oh, how did this guy get to be king? He, seems like he must have, wormed his way up into power or something, and start doing that kind of thing. Like I have my players in my Invisible Sun campaign right now, they have this thing that they do that they call head canon, which is I present them with something and then they come up with like the stories behind those things in their own mind, right? They create the canon of the world, but they know it's not the actual canon, so it's head canon, right? It's very fun, and it really shows me that they're interested, and it's great.
Oh, I love that. I'm thinking right now, I saw a wild like mind map sort of application that Sam DeLev from Callisto 6 used to, as they were sort of looking into all the NPCs they had met in season 1, and all the weird little outstanding questions they had, and all the plot hooks that they started to follow up on but hadn't yet. They built this whole thing that they shared with the other players because they're just that kind of player. And so that is why Eric Campbell and a bunch of people over there, that's why Sam's in so many games, because having that kind of person as at your table is organizing the information for themselves, for other players, for the GM. Man, I love when players are kind of so methodically curious, right? They're really hungry for that information and they're holding it in their heads. That's such an as a GM and as a player, right? Sometimes as a player, I forget what happened last week, but I know that player across the table, it remembers it like an iron trap, right? And I can lean on that and appreciate them for it.
Just makes my little GM heart just flutter when somebody shows that, or like, even just like you said, right? Remembers what happened last week, or if someone says, "Oh, now what was the NPC's name who did this thing?" And before I, as a GM, can even answer, another player answers and says, "Oh, that was that guy," and he, that's a great feeling. And this doesn't have to be just about the GM either. Like, here's something that people, I think, don't do enough of, and that's sort of get invested in everyone else's character and their story, right?
Yes.
Like, learn, even if it's only on a meta level, even if your character doesn't know the other character's story, as a player, I can know your character's story. And that allows me to be, thrilled when you see the thing that you've been longing to see, or you accomplish the thing that you really wanted to accomplish, or whatever, or be sad for you when I know how much, this city meant to you, and to see it, be eaten by Godzilla,
And I am underlining that 10 times. I think that's so wild. And some players have these backstories, have these headcanons for this character, and it remains a headcanon because it hasn't been brought up in play yet. And if I can know that as another player, my character doesn't know, but that gives me the opportunity to ask the right kinds of questions, because I know you want that stuff to come up. As a player, I get to be a foil, or I know you have this value that you're holding quietly behind, and I get to maybe challenge it as a player, so you get to show it off, show that cool thing off. I think that's so smart. And when I see other players riffing off each other as a GM, I just that's the win condition. That means that the cauldron has been put correctly together, and they're just making beautiful story happen when I sit back, which is like, I'm a lazy GM, so that's my happiness.
I think that's brilliant. I think that when as a player, if you know the other player and their character, because it's a joint storytelling experience, right? The GM's not the storyteller. We're all storytellers.
Yeah.
And so as a player, if I can sort of maneuver things, toward your interesting backstory, or that thing that I know you love, right? Or whatever, that's just such a great group dynamic, because then you're going to do it to me, and it's going to be great. Yeah.
I'm thinking about player types and character types and kind of archetypes, right? So sometimes, when I'm thinking I've been an okay player, I sometimes I'm a little disappointed in, Darcy's playing another Lara Croft Tomb Raider character again. Okay. So I like to challenge myself a little bit. So, and I think my games are better because my co-players and my GMs know that I'm going to play that freaking Lara Croft Tomb Raider character again. And they've sort of seen what I can do with it. So sometimes when I'm in a rut, do you have any, I really respect players that can always do something different in any game I have them in. Maybe we're playing the Numenera 6 times, and every time they've played something really wildly different. So do you have any advice for how to be kind of a creative player at the table?
Yeah, those are good points and good questions. I think that, people appreciate that. And again, because we're focused on being everyone's favorite player. Yeah. And so when you can come up with the new way of doing something, and I just sometimes you can't do this, but when you're able to, don't just roll to attack and roll damage or whatever it is. think of something that is stranger than that, that is the sort of more outlandish than that. And it doesn't have to be stupid or crazy or silly, but like, if you're shooting arrows, and you're shooting arrows at the orcs, maybe shoot an arrow at the chandelier that's above the orcs, right? And have it come crashing down on them or whatever. And that kind of creativity, creativity spawns creativity, right? It's going to, it's going to inspire other people. But the other thing is too, is, when we're playing role-playing games, we all sort of have the movie of the game in our heads that we are seeing. Yeah. And the more interesting that you can make everyone's movie in their head, the more people are going to appreciate that, right? And it's more interesting visually to see that chandelier come crashing down than to just shoot another orc.
And even if you just shoot, you're just shooting the orc again, describing it cinematically a little bit can sometimes make a really rote action feel fresh. The camera zooms in as I pull the arrow's feather up near my eye, right? Which is probably bad arrow form, but I don't know. It's cinematic, right? At least I'm describing it in a new way. Just using fresh words can help.
I think that is so true. We talk about this in terms of being a GM all the time, right? Keep things exciting, keep things fresh, be evocative when you describe. But players should do the same thing, right? Be evocative and interesting when you describe what you do too. And again, creativity breeds creativity. You'll suddenly start to see everybody being more interesting and creative, and they will remember you for it.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And I definitely, I think there are different tools to being, like there's the speaking and camera talk is kind of one way you can be using a fresh vocabulary as you're of describing the things. And I've definitely seen, I feel like these are little weird mind viruses or memes that spread around, right? Like when someone does something cool and creative or is using, different film terms for how they're describing it, or they're, I guess I've just seen someone do something cool at a table that's really creative, approaching things in a new way. And I've seen that spread to, that's something we use a lot now, where I'll notice that another group is doing it. Something even just, I feel like a lot of practices at the table can spread like that. And that's why I love getting to play with new groups, with new players, because people come in with these different ideas about how we engage at the table. So I love seeing that creativity spread.
That's an interesting point that you brought up about new players, because I have had the same experience. If you'll find that new players, because they haven't sort of fallen into the routine, right? They will, while everyone else is making attack rolls against the monster, they'll do something crazy. And it's refreshing and interesting, because they don't know that the sort of most efficient thing to do is to just do as much damage as you can with your sword.
Yeah.
And, I can certainly say as a GM, I appreciate that kind of thing, because it's more interesting to run that encounter. But as a player, I love it too. I love to see people, come up with some, let's not fight the dragon. Let's, climb across the stone features in the cave and drop down behind the dragon and steal his treasure or whatever, right?
I love that. So we've talked a lot about proactive, really great things you can do at the table. But when I think about really bad experiences I've had, or reasons that a campaign will come to an end, a lot of times it's for really boring logistical reasons, right? Just kind of, what we're doing requires a bunch of people to get their schedules to line up, to show up prepared to game. So, do you have any advice for kind of best practices of being a good guest, being a good part of this social contract that we're sort of setting up even before we touch dice or touch our books?
Right. We're back on the meta level again. And you were talking about being a host and that those kinds of things. But I think that sometimes, maybe we get so focused on the game that we forget that we are a guest in somebody's house or apartment or, wherever it is you're playing. And, just sort of follow the sort of normal rules of decorum, right? It's particularly important, I think, to think about the space around the space that you're gaming in, right? Is someone's roommate trying to sleep and while you guys are playing, be quiet, right?
Yeah.
If there are kids, if the host has kids running around, watch your language,
Yeah.
those kinds of things. But again, I think it's some of these things are things that we would do in normal life, but suddenly we get around the game table and we kind of get into this different headspace and we forget to, just be a good person.
Yeah, some of the consideration falls aside a little bit. I definitely think I see this more with like being on time is a thing that certain people, if we have a coffee date, they're 5 minutes early, but sometimes with game time, everybody's showing up a little late, and I think just like you said, a lot of these good habits can propagate. I think bad habits can propagate too. And so, once one person's always 30 minutes late and we're waiting for them, everybody's going to kind of doesn't want to sit there, just get there early just to sit there. So I think if you are a person who's consistently on time, you're kind of setting a good example. Hopefully other people will sort of show up on time. I think there's a propagation here that you can be proactive about.
I think you're right. And timeliness, I mean, if there are 5 people in the game group and you're always 15 minutes late, that's 5 minutes or 5 people who you just took 15 minutes away from them, right?
Yeah.
And not just 15 minutes of playing an awesome, fun game.
Right.
And so, just that level of consideration. One of the other things that I think about sometimes is in so much of my life, so much of my gaming history, we've kind of made the GM be sort of the hub of everything, right? They create the setting, they run the game, they host the game, they provide the food, right? And sometimes that's because that's that person's personality type.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to really encourage people to try really hard to spread those responsibilities around, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're playing at Darcy's house and I'm running the game, some other player might want to provide the food and drinks, right? Or players, right? And so none of those sort of heavy responsibilities all fall on one person because it gets to be a lot. I think it encourages kind of burnout in some people. To be host and game master and cook and all those things. I think there's a lot of people who, if they're invited over to somebody's house party, they're going to bring, a snack or a bottle of wine or whatever. And really the same kind of thing should go with every time you go over to somebody's house to play a game. Mm-hmm. Even if it's just a bag of chips or whatever, right? You're showing the consideration for everybody else.
And sometimes just asking, I think, maybe you're the person who always brings a bag of chips and no one else is contributing anything. Okay. I think sometimes I've gotten a lot of value. Sometimes people just, they're already looking at their character sheet. It's not out of any malign nature. It's just not thinking about it, not active consideration. So sometimes I'll ask, hey, I'll bring chips next week, host or other players. Is there anything else that someone can bring, or do we want these chips? Sometimes just starting that conversation can break you out of the habit of jumping right into game thinking and remembering that we're all here to be good guests and considerate, kind people to each other.
I think that, overall, sometimes if you're in the middle of a year-long campaign and you've got a bunch of stuff at work or school and it's actually been really hard for you to even get to the game session and everything, you kind of show up because you're feeling like it's an obligation and there's a little bit of resentment or you're just starting to kind of take it all for granted. Do your best to get yourself out of that headspace, right? Think about think about what you're doing, right? You know, we love role-playing games. We love gaming. You're there because it's so fun and such a creative experience, and it's, you know, a creative experience like no other.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you can just get yourself in that mindset, how happy you are to be there, you're going to do all of these things, right, that we're talking about. They're going to come more easily to you, if you just sort of show up with a little bit of joy.
I think that's a great point. A lot of times I leave a game session if I start in a funk with, you know, feeling great. I almost need to come down if I need to go do something serious after. So I think there's definite ways you can amp up your mood. And I think I like to be the player that brightens everybody else's day, right? If I can, even if I don't have a lot to give that day, just not being in an active funk is something worth putting a little work into.
Right. And you know, and it's gonna allow you to do all these things, right? It's gonna allow you to be curious and interested and helpful to other players, and you know, you're more likely to bring the right snacks and, you know, that kind of thing, right? We're doing this because we love it. And
absolutely. I think we're kind of starting to talk about being respectful to the other humans around us, and being friends, right? I think even, man, I don't know how to make friends aside from come play an RPG with me anymore, because that's just what I try to get anyone who interacts with me to do. So, what is your advice about not just being a good player to each other, not just being good guests or hosts, but being good friends? You know, being the player who is kind of thoughtful on that friend level as well.
Well, now we really are getting into what we were talking at the beginning about just don't be a jerk, right?
Yeah, step one.
You know, but there are proactive, positive things that you can do. You know, things like, you know, if you know that someone is sensitive about a particular topic, avoid the topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
If language is an issue for someone, or for like we said, like someone outside the gaming space, you know, watch your language. You know, if you're starting to go on and on about, you know, something and it doesn't look like anyone's really that interested, wrap it up.
Yeah.
You know, I think of that as like reading the room, right? Pay attention to the other people enough so that you know whether you are contributing interesting things or whether you're, you know, slowing things down and kind of boring everyone. And, you know, and the reverse, right? When someone else is saying, you got the long speech or the, you know, complicated action or lots of questions for the GM, listen, right? Be a good listener.
Mm-hmm. Be active if you can. I've definitely found that the skills of reading the room, of figuring out kind of what people are engaging with and what people aren't, I feel like that took some time for me to get. And I had to do a lot of asking at first. I wasn't, you know, sure, was that interesting? Was that not? So sometimes, you know, I think not everybody comes into RPGs feeling like they're great at that skill set, that they're great at reading the room or kind of taking the temperature of what the energy is at a different point, right? When we're playing a mystery versus a combat, the what's appropriate at different points, it can change a lot. And I think as I gamed more, a lot of it came naturally. But I think just like you said, getting your brain in the right state to play before you get there. Like for a while I was like, especially when I was jamming, reading the room, I would like intentionally think to myself, like, I'm going to be looking to see what their reactions are because, you know, I'm going to be an active listener. Sort of there's something kind of powerful just about acknowledging it to yourself that you're trying to build that skill and you're looking for it actively. So I think even if you are worried you won't be able to read the room, there's a lot of progress you can make just by practicing.
Yes. And if that still is not a skill, just ask, right?
Yeah.
Just talk about it, right?
Yeah, great point.
Was I going on too long about the history of the elves, right?
Yeah.
And people will hopefully, you know, give you an honest answer and you can learn from that way. But, you know, Darcy, you brought up something, you kind of touched on it very briefly, that I think is also a really good point. And that is sort of understanding the tone of what's going on, right? Knowing when it's okay to be silly, when it's not.
Yeah.
If you're playing some really serious, horror game where really, really bad stuff is happening, that's probably not the time to make a silly joke, right? Or maybe it is, right? But understanding that,
a specific context,
yeah. And I know that that's tricky. I mean, but even thinking about it puts you a step ahead.
Absolutely. Thinking about it and talking about it on occasion, if you're not sure if it feels right for everybody else, or, and I think part of what this leads to is that the first step to being really, really good at something is really sucking at it for a while, or whatever that quote is for Adventure Time. Risking failure is a really interesting thing to do storytelling wise, and as my player character, and just so I think, trying to be creative, trying to be an active listener and an active, thoughtful participant. Anytime you're being active, you could make an active misstep, and I think you should give yourself permission to maybe not do it right all the time.
True.
Do you have any thoughts on what if you did read the room really wrong, and you thought you were, contributing actively to sort of the lore of the place, but you just kind of killed the whole vibe? Do you have any advice on how do you both give criticism and receive it, I guess?
Right.
All being good friends.
Well, one of the things that's great about role-playing games is, again, right, everyone is a joint storyteller. And so it's not an impossible task to say, okay, rewind a bit, right?
Yeah.
Let's not go down that path. And I don't mean that literal path in the woods. I mean, wherever we ended up where we didn't really want to end up.
Yeah.
Topic-wise, tone-wise, suddenly we found ourselves in a sensitive area that is bothering somebody. Just rewind, get out of there, right?
Yeah.
If you make a mistake, if you do any of these things that we've talked about, but you do them incorrectly, right? Just apologize and move on, right? Don't dwell on it. Just, oh, sorry, I forgot, right? And keep going. Don't make a big deal out of it, and everyone will just kind of keep things moving, and no one will even remember.
Yeah.
If you are bothered by something, like if you're the person who is sort of on the other end, speak up and don't keep it inside and then grouse about it after the session or something. Just say, hey, that's not cool. I don't want to do that, or that bothers me, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Or this is the hardest one, right? But okay, I think we've talked enough about elves. Let's move on, right? I mean, sometimes you need to read the room for someone else, I guess.
Yeah, I think having other people, sometimes you can see that somebody is not having a good time suddenly. If you're that player or that GM, seeing that happen, even if you don't understand why, I think there's a lot of value to just kind of trying to move the story along, like get somewhere else. No Thank You Evil is the game that from Monte Cook Games that is for young kids to be played with adults as well. Sort of 4 to infinity, I think, are the ages. And one of the tools they have is this No Thank You Evil little token you can point to, and it's a mechanic to basically do what you're talking about, Monte, right? Like some bit of the game, if I'm a 5-year-old, is getting too scary, too intense, too real, like go elsewhere. You get to say, no, thank you, evil, to this. And we move on to some other part of storytelling, because this hobby we have is infinitely expansive. There's no reason to dwell on anything that is making the game unfun. There are good ideas and more fun business over there. So I think some GMs can be worried they have to, or players too, they have to for realism, we have to sit here through this agonizing, bit of fiction because it's true to the story. The story is in your hands, right? And so
exactly,
I really like your idea of,
and that could be anything from something as mundane as, okay, guys, we've been searching these dungeon rooms for a really long time and it's really boring. Let's move on.
Oh yeah.
or it could be something sort of more serious than that, right? Like if you're watching a movie and suddenly the movie kind of takes a dark, depressing turn, and that's just not where you are at right now. Like all you can really do is walk out, right? You can't change the movie. Role-playing games aren't like that, right?
Right.
You are an active participant. You can say, I'm not happy with going down this road.
Yeah.
And I guess to bring it back to, this sort of positive, be everyone's favorite player, be receptive to that. Say, okay, they're right. Let's keep going. Let's do something.
There's endless conversations that I see in forums and on Reddit and places about, I have a problem player, or I am the problem player, or, there are some things that, you just find out that they're all going for this goofy tone that you didn't realize you signed up for. And it's just that sometimes there aren't ways to easily make the game the right game for everybody at that time. So does your best game ever go into kind of dealing with times where you can't resolve those sort of discrepancies and what people want from the game?
It does.
Okay.
Sometimes what you're talking about comes from choosing the right game, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it comes from being part of the right game group.
Right.
And so both of those topics, choosing the right game group for you, choosing the right game for you, those are both topics that are covered. But also, I tried to kind of go through all of the problems that come up. I try to avoid saying problem player because so many times it's not the player that's the problem. It's a behavior or it's something that kind of arises from two different people, kind of interacting, and whether that's someone's kind of being a rules lawyer, someone is really upset by the decision that someone else made, those kinds of things. I mean, almost all of them boil down to just talk about it, right?
Right.
Because it's a game about talking, right?
Yeah.
Role-playing games are ultimately, you play them by talking. And so the problems that arise are almost all solved by talking. The book kind of gets into like why I think those problems arise, like what's really going on if someone, if someone's trying to run your character, what's really going on there? And then, so that's interesting and hopefully useful, because you can, if you think about why that problem's happening, then you kind of know how to talk through it better, rather than just saying, hey, Mike, stop doing that. You're a jerk.
Right. Giving a name to the root cause of the problem can really help. And I think getting to see, I'm really excited to get to read that section, just because I think it can be really hard to navigate those conversations if you don't really have a script for it, right? I'm so conflict averse, at least. I do very little negotiating on this, and being able to say, you're not a jerk, but you're doing this behavior that I now have sort of words to talk about. Now we can get somewhere with that. So just as we've bitten off a tiny piece of this larger topic about being great players at the table, there's going to be deeper dives on this and many, many, many other great topics in the book, Your Best Game Ever. So sadly, we can't touch on it all, but I wanted to bring up the what if we have a big conflict question, because I think it's one of the most common that I see. Am I the right player for this group?
I agree. I think almost every time that I do like a panel or a talk at a convention, as soon as we open it up for question and answer, the first question starts out, I have this player in my game who, right?
Yeah.
And, and it's often lots of the same kinds of things. And the solution is almost always the same, right? Just talk about it. But hopefully my intention is that Your Best Game Ever provides ways to do that, because I like you, Darcy, I don't like conflict. I don't and there are solutions that are better than, you're being a jerk, knock it off.
Yeah. Right. Excellent. So look forward to those solutions. You can find many more deeper dives in Your Best Game Ever. You can go to yourbestgameever.com to check that out. And of course, we're going to be doing a couple more video series on this. So if you have other questions about being great players, great GMs, great designers, and thinking about all the things that make any kind of RPG really shine, check out the rest of this video series, check out the book, and I would certainly love it if you would share some of your best player stories and tips in the comments below the video and on social media with hashtag YourBestGameEver. Thank you, Monte. I certainly feel like I have a lot of cool homework to work on, which I love. I get to up my XP.
I hope everyone goes out there and everyone becomes everyone's favorite player.
Heck yes. It's a fight to the top.
Exactly.
All right. Have your best game ever, everybody.